Hey everybody, John Gay here, Executive Director of the John Quincy Adams Society. Got a video right here coming up for you on graduate school admissions and deciding whether to go to graduate school in foreign policy. We'll have Kathryn Meyer, Director of Admissions and Recruiting of the Bush School at Texas A&M. Really great program. We had it get cut off within the first few minutes, so we'll be joining it in media res. But you didn't miss anything important. It's a great presentation. Here we go.
Training to prepare for specific fields. For instance, with us in our international affairs program, we're specifically in national security and diplomacy and in international development and economic policy. So I will get sometimes people asking me about programs that deal with social justice. I want to look at diplomacy interests. I can tell them if they're a good fit for us, or if they need to go out and look at a couple of our competitor schools, which I'll introduce you to a great website if you're not already aware of it in a few minutes, that you can do a little bit of searching. But you got to figure out where you want to be with your career before faculty want you sitting in their classes and talking, because grad school is a sprint. You had 4 years for your undergrad, but you've got to hit the ground running when you get into grad school. So they want you to have already worked out a little bit of where you think you want to be. That doesn't mean that people have already handpicked each agency they want to go to. Some have, but largely it's just meant to come in and say, look, I know that I want to focus on these 3 or 4 things and not just go, I haven't figured it out yet. I'll just work on this as I go along and take classes that are interest to me. Because at some point you've got to prepare for an internship. At least a lot of programs like ours do require those internships for those networking experiences. We also get a lot of questions about when's the best time to attend grad school. I will say that most schools are going to prepare, you're going to be prepared better if you go out and work for a few years and come back. But we are also realistic that there are many great students who already know where they want to study, what they want to do, and they're ready to come into grad school straight from undergrad. So we're not necessarily looking to turn those students down if they're a good fit. So if the time is right for you, then I would say go ahead and try. The worst that can happen is a school telling you need to go ahead and take a step back and work for a couple of years and reapply because you're lacking some experience or you're lacking some element of maybe a language component that they want to see. And if that's the case, then you know what to go work on and come back and maybe present yourself a little bit stronger in the years, a few years down the line. So I will just say the best time to attend grad school was when it's right for you. But do realize the more competitive an applicant pool is, the more they're going to push back if you're coming straight from undergrad. So preparing for a career and you've got, make sure I didn't skip it yet. So choosing from different interdisciplinary fields is a lot of what our students are looking for. So I've just put some of the areas. It is quite robust. Now we have also a program that's called a Master of Public Service and Administration. So you're going to see all kinds of names, an MPP for public policy, an MIA in international affairs, a global policy degree. There's all kinds of names and there's all kinds of elements within those programs that you can focus upon. So really, you've got to do your legwork and do some homework in figuring out what are the names of the different titles of the programs and what are their support fields, whether they're tracks, concentrations, study areas, electives. You're going to want to kind of pinpoint which ones interest you the most. So I've labeled a couple of them here: communications, public relations, development, conflict resolution, security and intelligence. There's all kinds of variations of these names and elements out there. You've just got to start figuring out and feeling your niche. Where do you want to become more of an expert in? And sometimes it can be more than one of these. Common job sectors and agencies, in particular, that our international affairs and our public service work with are nonprofits and international NGOs. That can be anywhere between a quarter to a third of our classes, depending on which program. Federal government is big in our international affairs. because they are looking at national security agencies by and large for that field. But it also plays a role in our Master of Public Service. So you're going to see federal government as a viable option if that's where you're trying to get your foot in the door. A program like this could work. State and local government is another big one for us. And then private industry is a little bit smaller for us than some of our competitor schools in the DC, Boston kind of areas, but it is a way for many people to go. And I've listed some of those agencies that we just see from year to year continually hire our students. So as far as the public service job market, just remember that you're developing marketable skills. And there's a number of different public service jobs. And I say public service because that is largely where our students are headed. But you can be an analyst. And there means analyst of all types. So there's people who are analyzing budgets. They're analyzing intelligence information that's coming in. Some are more on the business technical side with information technology, cybersecurity issues, risk and compliance. You can be a coordinator of different communications, coordinator of policy, homeland security, emergency management, public health, after school programs, which have more to do with the education and nonprofit fields. A lot of our students, especially those that are young, might go into the fields of consulting because they don't have enough experience yet to get their foot in the door for those federal government jobs. So again, that can be in any number of ways. Sometimes that is on the private industry side, money laundering, maybe some strategy, response, and recovery. Some of students have these titles that are called developer. So they're developing policy or protocols. Some are doing investigations. That could be the FBI. It could be with any of the NSAs, and maybe they're working more on a criminal kind of background. Some others are doing some of these investigators for social equity. So it could be with housing, social services. There's managers, and again, that's a broad topic. So managers of nonprofits, some are going into legislative offices, researchers, think tanks is where they're working for a few years. It just means that these types of skill sets, same idea, you got to figure out what is the driving force that I think I want to get into this type of agency and do this type of work. Because the more you know that, the more you know where you can shore up some of your areas that you didn't get a lot of development with in undergrad, and now you're coming back to grad school to fill in those gaps. So in that case, somebody might be doing more quantitative analysis courses. So when you are looking at all of this, just keep in mind the admissions timeline for schools. Because right now, we're having students come to us saying, I'm really interested in looking to start a program in the fall. And they're too late. We work our admissions process about a year ahead. So if a student is looking for a fall entry, they're going to have to apply that fall before. So for instance, we're going to open up our application process in August, and we're going to run a priority deadline for the middle of December. And then we are going to start reviewing those files in January. We interview our students in February and make admissions offers in March. And then students have until April to get back to us. So you, in knowing that our deadlines hit sometime between mid-December and mid-February, need to prepare ahead of time so that you don't miss that window of opportunity, or you have to sit out a complete other year for many programs. Sometimes programs will have a spring start, but many of us don't. We only run admissions once a year, and that's for fall. So just remember, summer, research and talk to others. August, September, start looking and researching your schools, comparing them, figuring out what's needed for their applications. You should start submitting those applications for your most desirable schools. Get those support documents in. That includes transcripts. That includes contacting your letters of rec. Note if there's separate aid deadlines, because obviously grad school's not free. So you got to be able to apply for those opportunities for scholarships, GA positions, loans. FAFSA gives you a little bit more time, but we'll talk about that later too. In the winter, you're confirming your app. Have taken the GRE if it's required, and I'm going to talk about the GRE in a few minutes. And then the spring, you should start interacting and visiting schools. We were fortunate enough that we had a visit day for our two programs the end of February. So we got ours in before everything started shutting down. but a lot of our colleague schools were doing those online events. So just know that you want to try to visit the campuses you're most interested in, because it's going to give you the best feel of how you fit in that program and what you're going to be able to get advantage of by working with those faculty, because you're going to be a lot closer to your faculty at the graduate level than you ever were, most likely, at the undergrad level. These are people you will go in and speak to repeatedly after classes. So when you're ready to research graduate programs, a lot of us are just going to go to the internet and just Google things. And I have that on my next part. But I'm also going to give you some sites that I think are helpful. So if you do plug in certain schools or titles of Master of International Affairs, many times these search engines are going to come up because schools advertise on them. Many times a lot of those research results that come up are going to be online schools because they're willing to pay a lot more money for that. I don't have the budget as a public school to put in hundreds of thousands of dollars for that. So remember that there's sometimes reasons schools come up on some of these, but there's any number of gradschools.com, graduateschools.com, graduateguide.com, all kinds of names. I will say that I'm fond of idealist.org, primarily because they also offer graduate fairs. And those are offered all over the nation, and we travel and hit those, as do many of our, again, competitor colleague schools in both the Master of Public Service and the International Affairs side. So you'll see our schools at those types of fairs, and you can visit at our table or interact with us. But Idealist has a lot of information. So for instance, this part that says info found on many of these sites, I know specifically that Idealist and Princeton have different elements of this that you can read and go through and look to see what do they say about preparing for grad school or applying, or the different variety, or what is an alternative to grad school if I'm not sure that's right for me. So go through those different sites and really give it some time to review. And then there's always that online search, keywords, right? When we go in, we might just say international affairs grad programs, but don't forget you might want to call it grad studies, or an international affairs and master's degree, or an international development advanced degree. You're going to get all kinds of different results depending on what schools have paid for them to show up in those different types of advertising. So Google those, see what comes up. I'm going to give you a quicker way of doing this in a minute. But a lot of times this is how people say they heard about us, is online programs. And you can get all kinds of schools from across the nation. It will pull up for those. And then your next step after looking for those is start looking for, is this a residential program or an online program? Is it a 1 year, 2 year? Do I want to stay in my home state, or am I open to moving anywhere across the US or even internationally? Do they have rankings for these schools? And is that of interest to me? Do I care if it's a top 20 school with a master's program, or am I going to go more by word of mouth and my comfort and me talking to other people? And obviously the emphasis, do they have the emphasis area that I want to pursue? And then you need to start prioritizing your top schools. When you've narrowed that list, these are all the things that you should be thinking about in a program. Number one should be that curriculum. What are the courses and specializations they're offering? Is it an academic program or professional program? Is it a required internship? Do I want that? Does it have a language component? If I'm really interested in study abroad and want to do that, does this program allow me an opportunity to study abroad? Do they run simulations in their classes? For professional development, are there speakers and conferences and all kinds of things that you can be interacting with people in that community, in that field? So here's that capstone or thesis again. Is it a good school for networking? Do they have enough people in the field that I'm interested in that maybe can help me get my foot in the door for something? For faculty, what are their backgrounds? Where are they coming from? What's the ratio of the students in a classroom? What kind of relevant work and research do they do? A lot of schools are going to have some fantastic faculty, so that's hard to narrow it down by that. But I can tell you, just like John was just mentioning the book he's reading by Jim Olson, you do have faculty that are draws, and he's one of ours. Anyone who dreams of being within the CIA, you read the background of Jim Olson, you come back going, yep, that's the program for me. And he's fantastic. He's personable. He teaches that area for intelligence. He has a lot of connections within the field. A lot of our students do go that. I think our reputation is starting to be the spook school. I know we're well known for other things too, but you start to develop that kind of reputation with our faculty. So whether or not it's accredited or ranked, if that's important to you, you need to pay attention to it. Cost. I will tell you right now, particularly for the international affairs field, a lot of our colleague schools are private and they're much more expensive. So just be aware of when they're offering a $20,000 scholarship compared to a public school that's offering $10,000. Are you still breaking even in that? Because their costs are a lot more many times. So you got to be careful in comparing the apples to apples and not apples to oranges, because aid and tuition and fees is really hard to decipher sometimes. So be sure you take your time to make sure you understand what's being asked of you for cost, because you will take on debt most likely going to grad school. Just know that up front. Career services, how much employment and assistance do they offer? What are their most current employment rates? So for instance, I know ours is sitting around the mid-80s for the international affairs within 6 months of graduation. But on our other side of the house, the Master of Public Service, they're usually about 95% within 6 months. A lot of that has to do with clearances for security for national security fields, and so that's understandable. But every recruiter and career services office should know those types of answers to give to you so that you can have a comfort level in knowing, when I get this degree, can I do something with it? Can you help me with that? And then you also have to take in campus location and facilities. Now, I will tell you, when my husband looked at grad school, I drew a line across the U.S. and said, please don't take me north of this line. I love the South. I love being warm. And of course, we moved. We went to Illinois. So I had to go against it. So just know you may draw some lines and you may have to go against that. 2 years you can do anywhere. So keep in mind the weather, social, political climate. Is that something you want to feel comfortable in, or do you want to challenge yourself? What's the transportation like there? Do I need a car? Do they have public transportation? Can I get to my classes or campus that way? What's the cost of living? And then what's the classrooms like in that campus location? All those things you have to think about ahead of time, which is why it's helpful to go visit a community before you choose, so you can think through that. So just remember, grad school is different. It's not about the social scene. It's about the programming and the activities that you're interested in. It's also not about necessarily, I'm only applying to the top 3 schools. Here, you've got some fantastic programs, probably to the top 40 to 50. Take your pick. It's more about the students and the professors care about what they do, and they, get that enthusiasm off to you. It's also not whether about all expenses are paid, because a lot of you are not going to get a full ride. And so you have to understand, is the cost reasonable, and can you afford to pay off that debt in the type of field that you're going into? Again, we know some of our competitor schools, a lot of their students go into private industry, even though they might have wanted to go into public service, because the amount of debt that they incurred, they can't pay that off with a public service job. And so they may have to go into the private industry for many years to get that down and to the comfort level where they then can go maybe into what their first love was. But this is very individual to you and to what you're comfortable doing. It's also not about how far you're from home, which many people sometimes consider when they're doing undergrad. Here, it's about the city and the town and the location you're going to reside, which I'll just say Texas is awesome. So there's a plug for us. University's overall reputation is important. We love playing off the Texas A&M name and all the outside sporting events and the notoriety of the university as a Research One school. But whether or not this is the right place for you, and keep in mind, it's the school. So for us, it's the Bush School of Government and Public Service. That's the name that people are really going to tell. That's the program they went to. Texas A&M is secondary to the Bush School in this case. So just find your comfort for this. Now, here's where you might come into some jotting down a website or two, because when you're researching specifically fields with organization memberships, it means that you can find a one-stop shop for a lot of this. And if you are looking at international affairs type degrees, I'll tell you right now, the first one I listed there is probably the most important. So if you want to go in and look for international affairs schools, the careers, they even have a section on scholarships and funding that's available. And that is called APSIA, APSIA.org. It stands for the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. It is the top 40 or so programs in the world that offer programs that focus primarily on international affairs, national security, development. They're very similar in make, but many of them we offer a Master of International Affairs and Master of International Policy, but you'll get American and GW and Denver. Some of those schools list 5 or 6 master's programs and another 2 or 3 PhD programs. So it is a one-stop shop to go in and do research and go into the website and then back out to any of those universities. It's really great. But you've also got other organizations that might have some helpful information. I'm not as familiar with these, but I did list them because you can go in and do some research on it. And that's the International Studies Association, CSIS, SID, Council on Foreign Relations. It's just a place you should be getting information. If you're interested more in public administration, look at NASPA.org, National Association of Schools of Public Affairs and Administration. And then they've got more of a research orientation for APAM and ASPA, but they're the same thing, .org on the end of all of these, and do some great research. I know the NASPA website, for instance, has a school function, just like APSIA does, where you can search for schools based on your interest in city management or nonprofits. So it's a great place to go in and help yourself. And then if you're also curious about what kind of jobs exist out there, well, for state governments, you need to look by your state. GovTexas is one place in Texas you can look. USAjobs.gov is that one place for those federal government. So if you're curious what's out there and what I need to do to apply for those, just start doing some homework now. If you're looking for national security and diplomacy, I've listed some for that. International economics and development websites and nonprofit resources and job listings. Idealist.org is again listed here. I talked about them earlier. But I mentioned this before, when you're ready to do general application requirements, just remember that deadline sometime between mid-December to mid-February. Sometimes they exist into May, but if you come to me that late, usually we're already filled. Most of the time, schools are going to get materials from you, include an online application with a fee. Now, those fees might be anywhere between $50 to $120, $150. So just be ready. You probably don't want to apply to 10 schools. You may want to apply to 3 or 4 at the grad level, but that's your call. Sometimes they waive fees, just depending on what you've done. So look for that. They're always going to want a professional resume, a statement of purpose, or an additional essay. So for instance, we ask for an international experience, what you've done for travel, how you speak, what you've been able to do for maybe study abroad, living abroad, work. We're also usually asking between 2 to 3 recommendations. We'll always need official transcripts. GRE test is starting to become optional. And then if you're an international student, we have to have language proficiency if you hadn't already met that by a GRE test. And then most schools are given decisions sometime between January and April. And then you declare a decision, a national deadline date is April 15th. So when tax day is on, you're also telling us where you're going to school. So I will give just a few things. I'm not going to read all of this out. I'm going to let you kind of reference it. But when you're writing your personal statement or your statement of purpose, depending on how the school writes it, just remember this is the one place that your voice is heard. You're talking about your background, expressing your fit for the program. So take your time on it. I wouldn't rush on it all in one night. I would take several days to do it and then have someone proofread it, especially if you feel the need to put in people's names and institutions. Because I don't know how many times I've read about how people can't wait to come to the University of North Carolina. And I go, well, I hope you applied to them because you just sent me their paper at Texas A&M. So watch for those kinds of things. It's not necessarily going to get you kicked out of the group, but if they're really competitive that year and someone just takes offense to it, they can just throw you in that pile and say, done. They should have proofread it. They can't be a grad school student if they do that. So just realize you don't want to hurt yourself right before you get started. Letters of recommendation, 3 letters are typical, usually at least 2 faculty. 1 can be something else. We're quite okay with 3 being from faculty. I found that our faculty in particular like to read about how you're going to do in their class. But I don't know that all schools are like that, so you can always ask them. You want to choose someone familiar with you, and you want to supply some information to your recommender, especially if they haven't seen you for a year or two, because they need to know what you've been doing, what program you're applying to, and then make sure that they have the correct links or the process and what's expected of them. Because we will just sit on an application that doesn't have those letters sent in, and they're going, I've tried to reach out to my professor. That's out of our hands. We're waiting on you to complete your application. So just make sure you can take care of that and give them time to respond. Now for us, grad programs, graduate record exam is the typical one, and that's the GRE. But I'm finding out it's just the general test that we're asking for, but more and more schools are starting to make this optional, because once a few schools do this, my lights keep going out, then all of us have to kind of follow suit. So this year, for this new entering class, was the first year we've made it optional, and we made it optional if you were above a 3.2 GPA. And that included a master's program or an undergrad. It's your call. So it's really, you just need to check into that before you pay $200 for this test, is whether they want it or do they even encourage you to do it. I was telling some of our students that if they had a really, really strong GPA, then it didn't hurt if they were a good test taker to go ahead and spend that $200 for the test, because some of our biggest awards want to see the validation of a good GRE with a good GPA. So those students were winning the full ride awards or the $15,000 per year awards. And it was harder to get noticed if you didn't have GRE. So it's not that if it's optional, everyone should do it. You can ask some questions about that through the admissions office, and we'll give you some honest answers of what we've seen. But I will say, if you feel like you're a good test taker, spend the $200, because that GRE can only solidify how solid you are. But you also need to find out what is the average for that school. So I just had a person email me saying, should I take it? And I said, as long as your GPA is solid and you feel like you want more funding, get that GRE above a 310 and then report it. If it's below a 300, don't report it or ask us to withdraw it. Because if I put in a 290 for your GRE with a 4.0, it's going to hurt you. I'll tell you that now. So all you had to do was email us and we would pull that out of the spreadsheet. So those kinds of things are good to know. GMAT is typically used by MBA programs. So when people send me a GMAT, it doesn't mean a lot to us because we just have so few of them. LSATs for law school, MCAT for medical school. It's usually people asking us if we will take LSAT because they were looking at both law and international affairs. It's up to the school whether they take it. A&M does not, because our law school is not located here on our campus. And then preparing for the test, just know most of our students self-study for these tests. But again, if you need that extra motivation and incentive, if I paid for it, now I got to study for it, then you've got Kaplan, Princeton Review, things like that. They're just not cheap. Those tests, prep courses can be anywhere between several hundred to over, 1,500. So just realize it may not be worth all that time. And then I just want to end on a couple of slides on costs, because this is a huge investment of your time and money. So if you're going to commit to grad school, make sure that you're ready for that kind of pocketbook hit, because they can run anywhere between $8,000 to $50,000 a year. For instance, our tuition and fees a year are a little over $13,000, and we're one of the cheaper schools. So you're hoping to get some scholarship to help cover that. But that's not always including all the fees. It's usually not including your cost of living with food, costs of relocation, traveling, incidentals. You just got to know if you're ready to commit to that, especially if you've got bills coming in from undergrad loans, and what it's going to mean to have to put more debt on top of that. But I do want to remind you, graduate aid is packaged very differently from undergrad. It's not just one big scholarship for your university that applies to everything. Most of your scholarship consideration is going to be through that program that you're applying for. So you're always going to also want to apply for FAFSA if you're able to. because you can get loans, and that's what a lot of our students rely on, past work, especially those with competitive interest rate, looks for those. Grad school applicants are independent. You're not usually hanging on your parents anymore. And so you are basically destitute. You have no income. You're a college student coming straight out for those. So you're already going to be tagged for higher need and can qualify for some loans. So just make sure that you fill out FAFSA and don't miss the boat for that. And then, as I mentioned, these are merit-based awards largely for some of the top programs with their top financial award offers. I don't want to get into need-based. So for instance, our program doesn't do some. I know other programs do need-based. I just don't want to go through all the financial aid information and trying to figure that out. So our awards are completely merit, but that varies by the institution, and it varies of whether the awards you're looking for are tied to financial aid or is it just done by the school. So you've got to ask those questions. If I get an award from the Bush School, can I also apply for scholarships over here at financial aid? And I'll tell you, there's a couple of them, but by and large, most of the big funding is through your department, which is us. And so you do have to keep in mind if that GPA and GRE is going to help or hinder you, and do you need to take the GRE to offset that or even to make you stronger? So as you're working these, just keep in mind with your FAFSA, you want to finance your education in this order. And you should already know this from undergrad, but remember free money, scholarships and grants, earned money. I don't know that there's a lot of people who go through and do work study at the grad level, but I'm sure there are some programs that do. We use what are called GAs, graduate assistants. There's also TAs for teaching assistants. And I know some of our students who are working at some of the on-campus residential housing, and those are RAs. If you can secure those, then you are working as you go along. And a lot of times those positions will also pay for part of your tuition. You may be left with some of the fees, but it'll help pay for some of that. And then the last thing you want to look at is the borrowed money. But I will tell you, you probably are going to end up taking out a few loans. Not everybody does, and you're great if you don't. But a lot of our students do have to rely on those loans to help them get through and pay their bills. And I believe this is my last slide before we start taking questions. Just remember, financing your studies, scholarships and fellowships are mostly merit-based. They don't have to be paid back, typically used for tuition. For instance, ours goes into your account. Anything that's left over, you get to use however you want, and that can be used for living costs. And they usually go to the students that the departments most desire. So for instance, if we're looking for a class of 90, maybe only the top 10 will get these really significant scholarships. But what's unique for us is that we provide scholarships to every student that we admit in our international affairs program. So all 84 students that I have coming in this class right now are funded from $3,000 up to a full ride. And it's renewable in their second year. So you pay attention to those kinds of things. We try to help everybody. We then open up assistantship positions in year 2. Some schools will give these right off the bat. Others are going to tell you that you've got to wait to the second year to do them. But when you get an assistantship, you're working 10 to 20 hours per week, either in teaching, research. I have a GA, for instance, who works with me for recruiting and communications. So you just figure out what you're applying for, and you usually get a monthly salary or some kind of tuition reduction. But you do have to go directly to your department, or as we let people know, Texas A&M is a large university and they've got all kinds of positions out there, and they actually like Bush School students because we're kind of known for the students of service and giving back and work hard. And so they'll hire students in international student services and maybe over the writing programs. So they can apply for things outside of just what our department asks for. But again, most students, about 75% of graduate aid is in the form of loans. It's a lot, but that's just the realities. Not every program can fund everybody. And do apply for your FAFSA. And then I don't know how much to talk about this, but public service debt repayment was a big talking point many years ago. But I don't know that the funding is necessarily going to last. It's always on the edge of being cut. They put in some really serious restrictions on the paperwork you have to submit. So it's a great idea to look and see if it works for you. But I'm telling you that it sounds good, but I don't know that a whole lot of students qualify for that debt forgiveness, especially now that the word has gotten out of what it is and more people try to look for it. Just fewer and fewer are able to qualify. Their numbers are too high for that. So I've given you a lot of information, but I am ready, John, if you've got some questions for me that if I can answer, I will be happy to do so.
Yes, yeah. And so everybody, if you look down at click on the participant list, there's a way to click on your name and click raise hand. So you'll jump up to the top of the list. I see we've got one already. You can also drop your question into the chat box. I can read it off. But Juliet, if you'd like to, go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I know that a lot of us, well, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I know myself in general have been having trouble with the whole coronavirus situation, especially with jobs. So some of us have been let go. Some of us have not been able to find a job since the pandemic started. So I was wondering what your advice is for grad school, just making sure that your grad school application is still competitive, even if there is a gap in like the work history aspect.
And I'm going to go ahead and cover another aspect because that also reminds me of a common question now. People who are still in school are also asking me when their college campuses are giving the option of pass or fail, of converting their grades to. Because of this very unique situation, normally we don't want to see that on a person's transcript, but we understand that converting grades from hey, I was very interactive in my class and now it just doesn't work as well online. So there's some forgiveness for that. And so it's going to be the same thing. You got to do what's best for you and move along, pay bills. So you're not always going to be able to stay in that lane that you had hoped to in having a job and finding employment. And so we're going to understand those restrictions. It's hard for everyone right now. And especially because you guys got hit right after all these applications went down. So you can't even help yourself for next fall going, I'm going to get into a program and let's see what we can do. So I guess my part on this is if you're looking at an international affairs program that requires language, for instance, keep working on language because that is always something you can do through just an online program, right? Through Rosetta Stone or whatever. If you can find internships or some kind of relevant employment or finding some of those options that allow you to go abroad and teach language in a foreign country, which isn't the best option right now for COVID-19, but we're going to have a lot of understanding for this situation. It's just unprecedented and we get it. I'm sorry, it sucks for you guys. But I know that there's also some other opportunities you have to look at. And I'm going to plug something from here at the Bush School. So for instance, we offer what are called graduate certificates. And we have one in advanced international affairs and another one in Homeland Security, public management, and nonprofit management. And those start every semester. So those are completely online programs. If people wanted to do, for instance, a certificate in advanced international affairs, they could do 2 classes in the fall, 2 in the spring. That earns them 4 credits, which earns them the certificate. And then if you're admitted into our master's program the next year, you've already shaved off a semester's worth of work. So that's another way of staying busy. If nothing else, granted, you're spending more money, but it does keep you busy in a related area and trying to get you in some relevant classes that you can then use for a master's degree. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Next in line, we've got Ines. What's your question?
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have 2 questions now. I had one, but after hearing about the certificate program, I want to ask about that too.
Okay.
My first question is about, you said that a bad GRE score or like a normal GRE score can hurt someone's application if they have like a high GPA I wonder if the opposite is true. If a good GRE helps decrease some negative perception on a mediocre GPA. That's my first question. And the second one is, who can take the certificates courses and what's the requirements to take them? Is a undergraduate student, can they take those courses?
Okay, so let me answer your first one with the GRE test. So yes, that GRE is meant to be a complement for most people with that GPA. But if you had a lousy GPA, and I'll tell you, students who come from Texas A&M many times had aspirations in biomedical sciences, engineering, all kinds of backgrounds that wasn't their focus, or they just, I'm away from home and I partied hard, and they tank their GPA. They can still get in if they have better coursework through ultimately their desired political science, liberal arts major, whatever they went into, right? And do well in that. They're still going to have to report that cumulative GPA, but I'm often telling them to highlight that last 60 hours or their major GPA on their resume, because that's unofficial. You can say that, but we're going to pull the official GPA off the transcript. But it's a way to promote it and say, look, I started off, but I've been coming back strong in an area that really did interest me. That GRE is a way to help make that up as well. Because there are people who are just bored in school, who are super smart, and that GRE can help with that too. But again, I would look to see what is an average GRE for that school. And if you're close to it, you're fine to report it. If you're more than 10 points away from it, have them pull it if you had it sent. Because it does typically hurt if they let you have it optional. So if I had, for instance, if I have a student who comes to me below a 3.2, that GRE is required for the MIA. So you got to, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. You got to send it in. Now, having said that, I'm going to hit that second part with that certificate. We will often tell students that if they can do well in graduate level coursework through one of our certificates, then you've proven you can do our classwork. So we push that they make A's in it if you can. But at the grad level, most of your grades are A's and B's. If you're below that, many times you've got to retake the class anyway. So you need to do well with an A. But for instance, if you're enrolled here at Texas A&M, you can get into that certificate while you're a senior. Everyone else, you have to have your bachelor's degree in hand in order to enroll. But for instance, students right now could apply sometime in the spring for a summer or fall start while they were still in school. But we know by the time they get that degree in hand, they're going to have it there by the time they start with us. So you just have to have a bachelor's requirement for that. And they have all of their information on our website. If you go to bush.tamu.edu, there are sections for academics, and you go to the certificates, and it'll tell you specifically what they want and what's required. But it's a very simple process. They're usually asking for a transcript, a statement of purpose, and a resume. That's usually about it. And GRE for some of the programs. Okay.
All right. Let me pull one in from the chat for folks that are already working in the field. So Jacob already works in private sector intelligence. How can your program help the career progression of someone like him? And also for people who are working, are there online part-time options so that you can keep your job? I mean, one example I would have for my own life is the program I was at had an office in DC, so I was able to take like a semester abroad in DC that I was actually working. So yeah, I'm just curious what how you'd read that.
Okay, so I'll say right now that our Master of International Affairs, and then we also have a Master of International Policy, and that international policy is for those with 6+ years of experience. Those are both residential programs. We do not have an online presence yet for international affairs. And I don't know that one's developing in the next few years yet. I think we're working more on joint programs. So you either have to go the route of the certificates. So for instance, starting with that online certificate of advanced international affairs is a great way to toe in the water and see how you like those classes. And if you do, you can look at others. We are going to have a DC presence starting very soon. We're working on some trajectory for that. Right now, the wheels are just spinning for it, so we really aren't announcing anything. But we'll have a presence there for some students to take classes. I believe it'll be more like our international policy in that DC area, but that's not on hand right now. So if a person looks at us, they're going to have to come to College Station, Texas to take classes in. The only other online option, at least at our school, for instance, is a executive master of public service. But it doesn't focus on international affairs. It does on homeland security, and it does on public management and nonprofit management. So if that works, people can do that completely online, with the exception as these programs for executive level, they do require students to come here for 1 week during the summer for 2 summers. So they have to do 2 weeks residency, 1 week each summer to complete that executive master of public service. That's our only online option right now for a master's level. I would imagine within the next 5 years, we may have another option. But for now, working professionals, normally we have to tell them, you got to stop what you're doing and come here and work for a little while before. Sorry, my light is behind my computer monitor, so it keeps going off on me. So unfortunately, we're just not the best fit for that yet, but in a few years we will.
All right, next question, Fabio.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks again for the awesome presentation. Very complete, and I thank you for that. So my question is more of a career question. So I was accepted for security studies here at George Washington University. And, I've been doing a lot of soul searching in terms of what I want to do. Security studies is clearly my main interest. But I am a dual citizen with Italy, and a lot of people have told me that, there's not really much point in pursuing a degree in security studies if you've got a dual citizenship. It just it's very hard to get a job. It's very hard to get into the national security community. And, maybe I should pursue another focus area like international law or, development or international affairs. I was just wondering from your experience, if you can speak to this, is that really is it worth taking that advice, or can someone with a dual citizenship still have any kind of credible career in the U.S. security establishment?
So this was one of the parts I warned John about. I might get some career questions. That's not my specialty. I have a great reference that you can reach out to my colleague, Matt Upton, who handles the career services. So I'm going to send that here. I'm going to just give it to you here, but I can also put it in the chat message for a second. His name is Matt Upton.
Oh, thank you.
He is head of our career services.
Okay.
And his email is MUPTON. It looks like Mupton.
Yep, Mupton.
At tamu.edu.
Thank you.
And Matt's the best person to ask these type of career questions.
Got it.
I just don't know the nuances of that. And the other person that's good for that, particularly when you talk about security studies, depending on what kind of element of security clearances, another good person is Professor Jim Olson. And it's another easy email. It's JOLSON at tamu.edu. And Jim Olson is former CIA who handles our advising for the intelligence area. So he's another great resource and advisor.
Fantastic.
You're going to come closer to answering that than I ever could. So sorry.
Oh, no problem. Should I, can I mention your name that we spoke in this meeting?
Yes, you sure can. Now just give them a little bit of time because everyone's drowning in emails right now, working from home.
I know.
And as you can see, I'm not at home. I'm in my office, but
I understand.
Most everyone else is working from home. And I know Jim is in and out because he travels a lot. But
no problem.
Give it a little bit of time. Yeah, they should be able to help you with that.
Hey, I really appreciate your time and have a great evening.
All right, appreciate it.
And Jorge, next question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, ma'am, how you doing? Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I'm not going to take too much of your time, but I did hear something about a interview process that you go through with your applicants. I was wondering if you can touch on that a little bit and just give us a little bit more information as to how the interview process goes, and if you could expand on kind of questions you go into,
Sure.
Stuff like that. Thank you.
Okay. So a lot of programs won't interview because it is an extra step and it is intensive. And I'll tell you, it is something we've done from the very beginning in our program. And that was when we were entering 20 students a year from the very beginning. And now we're bringing in 90 students a year for the MIA, MIP combined, and another 90 students for the MPSA. And so what that typically means is no matter how many applications we get, we want to double that in interviews. So for a class of 90, we want to do 180 interviews because we're not just going to invite in those 90 students. We're going to have a cushion because we know at least 30 people are going to turn us down. And we know that because they're applying to multiple programs and we're very competitive in getting high-end scholarships. So those interviews are for two purposes. I'll say the most important one is for us to sell you. We need you to come to campus, meet our students, meet our faculty, interact with them, be able to talk to the faculty that you hopefully are taking classes from. So what I'm doing on my end is when we send those invites to those top 180 students, and I'll say we were probably at around 250 apps, give or take this year. So some just never made it past that review stage. But those other 180 were moved forward to interview. And then no matter where they were from, I was emailing them saying, you've been invited to interview. I need you to respond to this email either through the survey we did, either telling me that you're going to do it online, which we'll set up for Zoom or Zoom or Skype, or are you going to come to campus this weekend? And we would post that out there. And here's the information on how to register for that. So we have over 100 applicants who come to campus, and the other 60 to 70 are all done through Zoom and Skype. And then I'm trying to assign them 2 faculty members. So if they're doing it here in person, it's a round robin session that's going on that day. So while one group is doing a student panel, another group is listening to the alumni panel, and another group is going 20 minutes for an interview, and then they're just hanging around the rest of the time. And they will do it in the morning, and then they do another interview in the afternoon. For those that are doing the Zoom and Skype, then I'm getting 2 professors at the same time to Zoom in or Skype with them together so that you can knock it out in 20 to 30 minutes for this set of questions that they're asking. Typically, they're asking things about, okay, here's who we are. They're introducing themselves. I teach in international development. I want to know more about what your goals are. Tell me what you want to get out of a program and where you hope to be in 5 years. So they're asking those traditional kinds of questions. They may then go a little bit deeper into your statement of purpose or something on your resume and say, tell me about this experience that I see you did. How did that contribute to who you are or your language ability? They're making that part up as they go, depending on your nuances. They want to know how you work with people because we do a lot of group work here, a lot of hands-on simulations. You are not just here and then leaving. You are here interacting with each other through classwork and just through social functions. So we like to know how you play well with others. So they're asking questions about group work, things like that. They want to know about your internships and what you've been able to do, your language ability. And in one important one that cannot be overlooked because it shows the maturity and the sincerity and you concentrating in a field is what do you read and what do you keep up with? Are you reading the foreign policy journals? Are you reading something through whatever, right? I mean, they've got all kinds of journals and pieces that they're familiar with. Wall Street Journal, do you keep up with what's going on? Different faculty will hit on that more than others, but they want you to be well-read and understanding of what's going on in the world. So I know that those are important things that they're going to want to know during an interview.
I think we got time for one more question. I'm going to pull together 2 from the chat. So one is David's question, and he's asking about there's a lot of jobs that seem to be obviously relevant for a grad school admission for, an international affairs program. What are some other jobs that look strong to you guys that make people stronger candidates that, on someone's resume? And then kind of the mirror image of this question from Andrew is, if you're coming from outside this field and you don't have the job and internship experience that's going to show it, how can you show that you have that interest? How can you make a case for yourself?
And that's the harder part, right? In evaluating, which I think is why the interviews help us be able to get a little deeper in for people. Because people can show that enthusiasm, say, I can't wait to get started in this. But I'm telling you, when you're competing against people who have traveled abroad, who have taken their language seriously and know a language pretty decently, you don't have to be fluent in it, but you've taken the time to work on it, because that's on an element for us. You can't graduate without a second language. So you're not taking coursework in language here. So you've got to be able to work on that on your own. I know sometimes it's the volunteerism and the service elements that you have to make up for, especially a young student who hasn't been out working and didn't get a chance to study abroad because of finances. It's how busy were you in your organization, or what organizations did you volunteer or be a part of? And what kind of role did you play in it? Were you just there to attend it, or did you help set up speakers and events and networking that you could have done in your community, or some type of organization you could have joined? I think those are all important ones. I know some people, I mentioned this earlier, have gone abroad and done maybe the JET program where they're doing Japanese English teaching for a year. Some have applied for Bourne fellowships where they're working on language. It's a very individual thing, and I'm telling you, it is hard to get that. But sometimes that's why something as general as a certificate program can also show that, this wasn't cheap, but I'm interested in a program like this and I want to learn more. But I took the time to take these classes at the graduate level and secure some knowledge in this field before I came in for a master's program. So anyone, in a sense, can do that kind of thing if they can't find a job. Maybe they can't do a language study abroad, but they can do a language, because you can do that with Rosetta Stone and others. So I would say focus on those elements. And I said it earlier, start reading up and keeping up with current events. You can be very knowledgeable and come across as highly intelligent and dedicated to that field because of your own legwork in following up with stuff, in attending webinars, in following events that interest you. And many of the schools like us will put a lot of these announcements of stuff and start joining the ones that they allow you to do. So it's at least a taste of some things you can do.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kathryn, for all the questions you answered, all the great information you gave us all. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I dropped the links in the chat box for our upcoming events. We've got one next Wednesday on PhD programs with Mike Desch out of Notre Dame. We've got one the week after with Stephen Walt on realism and the coronavirus. And then I've also dropped the prospective students link in there for the Bush School. So feel free to check those out. We'll send a follow-up email out after this, and we will also send those links out as well. But again, thank you, everybody, for coming out, and good night and stay healthy.